totally awesome. The ID.3 is getting an all-wheel drive. What nonsense, it's not getting an all-wheel drive. How did you come to that conclusion? Well, on this platform, to achieve over 300 HP, even the ID.7 has an all-wheel drive. Now, I'm confused because I actually thought that the ID.3 always features rear-wheel drive. I'm here to clarify things in such discussions, whether it's all-wheel drive or not, because it is indeed a bit confusing, given that the colleague here, the ID.7 GTX, it does come with all-wheel drive. Isn't this the same platform? What's truly happening? I'll explain in detail, but first, I'll introduce the ID.3 GTX. The community has awaited this for a long time. Now, here are the facts, what it can do, what it does, everything that you need to know about it. And then, of course, I'll give you a visual introduction to the ID.7 GTX, just so you've seen it, as a tourer. Quite intriguing. And then, based on the two vehicles, I'll finally explain the technical differences. Because no, the ID.3 GTX doesn't come with all-wheel drive. But then, how do they manage that if they're supposed to have the same amount of power? It's a bit confusing, isn't it? So let's dive into that now. And yes, the facelift is already out there. From the ID.3, if the GTX feels too much, too costly in aerodynamics without the same drag coefficient as the normal version, find plenty on Evium, and don't forget, there are many lease returns from the pre-facelift models. So, if anyone wants to snag a car for less, especially now when the used electric car market is on the decline, it's obviously good for those. Looking to buy a used electric car, you'll find it on Evium, and you can use the cost comparison calculator right away to compare it with a GTI, for instance, if you're coming from a Golf GTI. So, let's go. Yes, the IQ Light headlights come standard with the GTX. But what's far more interesting, let's talk a bit about the money. In Germany, this is not commonly discussed, but we do, because it's important for you. So, what's the deal with this premium regulation? Well, there's this. Premium surcharge from Volkswagen of about 7,000 euros, nearly 7,000 euros, meaning that if you order an ID.3 right now, you can take off another 7,000 euros from the price. I told you about this last December, remember? If the subsidy is removed, cars will become cheaper than with the subsidy, as manufacturers will compensate and compete against each other. Now, the sole issue present with this car here is that it remains a bit unclear how this situation will unfold. Because this incentive is limited until the end of March, that means you need to place your order by the end of March to get these 7,000 euros. Will he find a way to sneak in there, or won't he make it? That'll be tough, especially now. I'm at February 9th today, that's why you can't really say that. I hope so for you. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you, because that's no small price reduction. Because when we are talking in terms of price, it's going to end up being just a little bit over the 50,000 mark or so, give or take a few. I speculate it'll fall into that range. I'm always quite precise because I pull together all sorts of sources, and though they never say anything exact, you can sort of piece it together. The Pro S, so the facelift of the ID.3, costs around 47 something, and this one will be just over 50. So I think there'll be a 3,000 euros difference. However, if you ordered the ID.3 by end of March, you had the chance to benefit from a 7,000 euros incentive. That's quite a chunk of change. Maybe it's actually worth it, no matter how much you want the GTX, to go for the Pro S, because the discount is just much bigger. There at all. If you're simply unable to secure any form of discount right now, unfortunately by the time this particular video actually airs, or if the car is only available for ordering after the given discount period has already expired, then I have another innovative and effective method for you to save some additional money. Because maybe you remember Maniac viewer Andreas, it's been about 1.5 years, maybe even 2 or even longer, who had an accident with the ID.4 abroad and in Austria. And he faced huge difficulties because nothing was wrong with the battery and such, to do with what everyone's always talking about. The battery, I don't know, electric cars, but simply because the opposing insurance was kind of leading him by the nose, and he waited for the car for weeks, had to pay a lot of money up front. And I never imagined that a partner here at Maniac would actually be an expert in motor vehicles office. But in this case, yes, I said, because it's super cool. Because it's an expert's office that is found in over 90 locations across Germany. This is Berner's Automotive Experts. And why am I telling you this? Because usually a regional expert's office, I don't need to recommend to you if you're from Hamburg or, I don't know, somewhere else, then it's no use to you because they won't come to you from Munich. But an expert's office does. If you have an accident with your beautiful car, not your fault, the following: they come and close the legal loopholes that insurance companies like to use. So the opposing insurance, to kind of fob you off and save some money. They, of course, want to be economical, which isn't in itself deplorable, but an auto appraisal office, they look at it and think, well, not like that. and I'll link them in the description box for you. Auto Experts burner, you've got to remember them. So, as I mentioned, exactly 90 times across Germany, and they carefully ensure that you can get the maximum possible amount when someone happens to damage your beautiful car. Though of course, I'm crossing my fingers that won't be the case, but any of us might need an expert at some point, or will need one, or you know someone who does. Share this with all of your friends. So, that is that. Now, we have gotten here the ID.3 GTX in a completely new guise, in a new color. Yes, it all looks super sleek. I've always been a big fan of red. Combined with the black, it looks absolutely amazing. And I think it's great that the ID.7 GTX as a tourer is standing next to us, because it has similar features but in different color combinations. Then you can really showcase that. So those of you who are connoisseurs will notice here a honeycomb grille is installed, making the whole appearance seem even more aggressive. We've got these LED accents again, just like with the GTX model so far. With the ID.4 and ID.5 there were these three, which even looked a bit more aggressive. I find this quite restrained. This is, so to speak, the GTI of the ID.3, if you will. And even more so, because in terms of power, we're already in Golf R territory. Indeed. And that's totally awesome, because it now makes it a bit more emotional, a bit less plain and functional, and just straight up emotional. By the way, there's no illuminated VW logo here. Why is that? I've looked into it as well. It's quite an interesting story. The ID.7, specifically the Tourer that's now being approved or ordered, actually has it. In the previous ID.7 sedan version, it wasn't available. Why? Because legislation now allows illuminated logos, provided they are connected to the main headlights via a light strip. That's the case here too, but there's also a requirement for how large the logo must be. That means they could have made the logo smaller to get it approved, but then they would have had to modify all those body parts again. Because a smaller logo requires smaller cutouts. That's the reason why there isn't an ID.3 with an illuminated logo now. Your thoughts on the design? Please comment. I find it quite snazzy, and it's now becoming a real threat to the Cupra Born, at least until the Cupra Born comes along on this platform with these parameters as well. What are those parameters? So let's move on to the spec sheet. Interesting story. Because, and not everything is so pleasing for previous ID.3 facelift buyers, but I'll explain that to you in a moment. We now have an undercarriage that is quite beautifully visible here, ultimately in an imaginary way. With this black separation from the red, it looks really snazzy. We now have 79 instead of the previous 77 net kilowatt hours. It's not a huge step forward, so you won't see any dramatic range increases. However, it might just offset a little bit of what's lost in efficiency here. Because of this sealed front, where there's no air curtain to let the air through, the drag coefficient stands at 0.27, which is slightly worse than the regular ID.3, and as a result, you'll have a bit less WLTP range. Just a bit more battery power, it really needs that for a little more strength. Why? Because we have significantly more power here. How has it been so far? 204 horsepower to the rear was, so to speak, the peak of excitement. Now it looks entirely different. The ID.3 GTX comes in two variations, one as the GTX and as the GTX Performance. I also find it super cool that they're taking this step. For those who actually go for a Golf R instead of a GTI, or a GTI Club Sport instead of a regular GTI, those who always want a little something more beyond the top model. The GTX has 286 horsepower, or 210 kilodollars. Actually, these are the exact specs of the new base of the new platform, which is also used by the ID.7, which ultimately debuted in the ID.7, which then also transferred to the ID.4 and to the ID.5 as well. This API 550, or whatever the abbreviation of this drive is, one might now ask, okay, but why doesn't it have all-wheel drive? Or how does it even achieve this level of performance? It has now been upgraded to possess a total of 326 horsepower, effectively putting it into the ring for direct competition with the Golf R model, marking a significant milestone. In terms of acceleration, not quite, so there's still a bit of a gap from the Golf R. Naturally, it's heavier than a Golf R, and when you compare it to the standard combustion engine, it takes roughly 5.6 seconds to accelerate from 0 to 60. And the standard non-performance version requires precisely 6 seconds. That's really good, definitely more than 1.5 seconds, almost even 2 seconds faster than the ID.3 has been so far. You've surely noticed that already, but how exactly do they manage it now if, right over there, the ID.7 GTX model possesses an all-wheel drive system to achieve a total of 340 horsepower? How do we go about untangling this situation? Let me take a moment to explain. Here, we have a robust 210 kW motor placed here, translating to 286 horsepower. If you opt for the performance version, You don't get it through an all-wheel drive, but by simply making the rear motor a bit more powerful. That's it. Ultimately, it's a bit like engine mapping optimization, or how we know it from other models during the combustion engine era, where one model is like this and another manufacturer has the same engine in it, but slightly more powerful by tuning it up a bit. That's how you can imagine it here as well. So it's actually just a minor fine-tuning of the rear 210 kilowatts motor, increasing its power up to 240 kilowatts. That's it. The awesome thing is that VW has finally learned from all the criticism and doesn't limit these cars at such weird speeds anymore, where you're like, hey man, this thing has 300 whatever horsepower, and then you get this bar slammed in at 160, 170. No, at least the standard GTX reaches 180 km/h. That's quite good. Yet the performance reaching 200 km/h is better. That's like the magic threshold. You know the drill. Someone in the middle lane has their cruise control set to 175 or 180, and if you can do 180 or 184 Taro, then that overtaking takes forever. And then someone even faster comes along thinking, why don't you just overtake them quicker and merge back in? And you're like, I can't go any faster. But at 200, it really becomes somewhat better. That's truly an adequate speed. Much faster isn't really necessary after all, especially since it then naturally drains the battery in a whole different way. But how is it here to quickly get to the point and to visually show you the ID.7 GTX Tourer, since you've already seen the standard Tourer on my channel? The GTX variant introduces a notable distinction. The ID.3 has a standard 79 kWh battery, while the ID.7 GTX features a stronger 86 kWh battery for longer range. Despite different energy solutions catering to various needs, both models use the same rear motor, ensuring a reliable, smooth drive. The battery here, though, is 7 kilowatts larger. It's also pointless to compare in terms of range because someone who buys it doesn't want the other, and vice versa. But it sticks with 286 in the rear. However, an asynchronous motor is added to the permanent magnet motor at the front that drives the front axle on demand. This means, in addition to the 210 kW at the rear, there's another 80 kW at the front, which is 109 HP. And in this synergy, when both reach their highest speed, the intersection is exactly at 340 HP at the peak. So you have 340 HP in this car, which is, so to speak, 14 HP more than in the ID.3. Only it has two engines for this, or rather, then you'll have 14 HP more if you take the ID.3 with the performance package, if you take the regular ID.3. So the standard ID.3 GTX, you have, in addition to the 286 HP, the front motor with its 109 HP. So this one too accelerates to 60 in just under 6 seconds, pretty much like that one. This one, however, is heavier, has a bigger battery, has a larger body. And that's how you get to the 340 horsepower, because the asynchronous motor is added in the front. This is also resolved in a way that you can, in this car, choose a traction mode, for instance, when there's snow, so you have constant all-wheel drive, meaning it doesn't continuously engage or disengage individually based on the accelerator or throttle, but rather it's always there. Otherwise, in normal mode, it always engages when you demand power, or in certain situations, it's not always there like that. The primary motor is, in a manner of speaking, the rear motor, which is why it's an asynchronous motor, because a permanent magnet motor, it always has a certain resistance. The asynchronous motor, it runs almost without resistance in the front, and of course that serves the purpose of efficiency if it doesn't have any drag torque at the front. But it just runs idle, so to speak, merely engaging only when it's absolutely necessary. That is how you receive that power. I have already demonstrated the trunk and everything with the Tourer for you. 545 liters to 1714 liters when you fold it down. Just to sum it up, in case you haven't seen the other video, we're here to talk about an ID.3 GTX, but here are just a few more points. Facts, such as the rear diffuser, uniquely and effectively complete the entire package. Let's take a look from the front too. It comes standard with 20-inch wheels, and a different bumper than the regular Tourer, which actually affects the drag coefficient, setting it at 0.27, similar to the ID.3 model design, because the air simply can't just slip through. You need to know this. However, here, the VW logo is illuminated again. There's a significant update in the travel assist system, which essentially I really could have mentioned this in the previous Tourer video as well. It now ultimately no longer strictly and rigidly adheres to, no longer has to depend solely on lane markings, but is also able to use grass edges or curb edges as additional cues for navigation. That's great. Very urban specific, I know it from the middle ring, where there aren't always lane markings, but rather curb edges. And that's what the new Travel Assist now relies on, and it no longer needs lane markings. This implies that, toward the conclusion, the standard equipment package includes a more extensive features array. So, for instance, you get a red decorative stitch in the interior here. Let's take a closer look at the ID.3 from the inside. Just a quick peek for now. Red decorative stitching, that's always included, meaning you won't get it as elegant as the regular Tourer. You can choose the basic seats, which are these ones right here, or you can opt for the Ergo Active Premium seats in this particular bicolor, so to speak. But you always have, with the ID.7 GTX, these red accents. I'm not sure if I'd find that so cool with this car. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it's somehow not an RS6. You have here again in the steering wheel clasp, this red, have here again the red decorative strip, as well as simply this red, which runs completely through the whole car. It's just like that with this car. I think the white, so this bicolor, I honestly find a bit nicer, or quite a lot nicer, on the standard Tourer. But you also have here, well then, simply a more comprehensive standard equipment. As mentioned, the larger wheels, but interestingly, drum brakes at the back again, as you can see. And this one can tow 1.4 tons, being a GTX and all-wheel drive, not 1.2 like the standard Tourer or the regular ID models, which of course don't have all-wheel drive. So, that being said, I hope I'm not mixing anything up here. That's a lot of info. Now, you know the distribution, how it gains power, and how with the all-wheel drive, it gets power. Of course, we also have a standard black gradient, transitioning from the red, just like with the ID.7. Trunk-wise, everything remains the same. Here you can see the only difference between the 20-inch wheels in complete black or the 20-inch wheels in gloss spun. Gloss spun, of course, doesn't look as cool as black rims, especially because, you know, my EQS is the same, red, black, everything black. My EQS looks just like that. That's why I had the rims painted black from the original silver. The downside is 20-inch rims in black look much smaller than 20-inch rims in gloss spun. Just take a look at them. So it just appears bigger because the silver visually stretches the rim, making it seem slightly larger. Unfortunately, that's not the case here because it kind of blends in with the tire. The ID.3 GTX in its standard version comes with 215 tires and the GTX Performance with 235s. So there's a difference there as well. Naturally, it gets slightly more expensive. Unfortunately, I can't provide you with price information at this point. Let's take a look inside the car now because a lot has changed there too. And now there comes a slightly small bit of a nuisance, potentially for a few of the ID.3 facelift buyers out there. So here again, you can see the red accents all over the car. With the ID.3, I think it fits much better than with the ID.7, which might be noticeable to many. The gear selector has now moved right to the steering column. So it's a bit different at this moment. Now the good points and the less good ones. On the plus side, VW is genuinely making a strong effort to stay current, especially in the domain of software development. It's frequently a point of criticism, right? That VW is somewhat lagging behind in terms of their software capabilities. Where are the entertainment features and such? The simple software elements that can elevate or make the vehicle more interesting. Still, I find myself really missing the direct implementation of something quite like YouTube on this platform. I still don't understand why we can't have something like that here. Yeah, it's a bit of a pity. What kind of ID software do we have? Let's take a look here. Another criticism among many is that with ID models purchased about a year and a half ago or so, oh look, it's already 5.0. This is considerably newer than what we observed recently with the facelift. That's 5.0. And this is something you can't upgrade to if you bought an ID.3 a while back. That's really quite a significant pity for the customer in the end, isn't it? Spotify. What I meant by effort put in terms of software, is for instance this wellness feature. With its help, as I've already shown in the Tourer, you have these certain programs that, along with the ambience, work together with the ID light up front, the innovative ventilation, and the comfortable seats, such as massage and stuff like that. These could be such functions. And then here's the illuminated touch slider. That's what many people have criticized. It was stated in November, just over a year ago, when I was in Los Angeles, the ID.7 was shown, still in camouflage, that only this one has the touch sliders in lighting reserved for it. That has been notably changed now from the concept, and now the ID.3. GTX receives that too. But also the facelift, including this 12.9-inch display, which used to be smaller. And unfortunately, and this brings me to the downside, remains smaller even with the facelift. So the ID.3 facelift was released recently. I'm not exactly sure when. It was, I believe, summer last year, so 2023. And now well below. 1 year later, there's a somewhat larger and more advanced display, not just for the GTX, but also notably for the ID.3 facelift coming from a specific year of manufacture, which is 2024, during some month. That means it's possible that someone getting one delivered now in February still receives the standard display in the ID.3 facelift. However, someone taking possession of the car in July will subsequently get the larger display model. And that's quite a bummer for the customer. Yes, VW did communicate that, it's fair to mention. But I don't think many of you knew this, especially not customers, because dealerships won't tell you this. Most dealerships have no clue about this. Generally, when it comes to electric cars, they're basically talking out of their hats. And that's really a pity. Just like with the battery, that this 79 kilowatt hour battery will also be available for the Pro S in the ID.3 facelift. This means you've essentially only had a new car for 3/4 of a year and it's already outdated in a way. So from a customer's perspective, I really can't approve because it's truly very frustrating. And we're talking about battery size and screen size, and those are two things that aren't trivial, in my opinion. So how is the software performing at this location now? Well, it has really become exceedingly very good right now. You can tell the 5.0 version is just radically different compared to what we've had in the ID.7 so far. So here you have absolutely no lag at all. Does it stutter? Not at all. It's really cool when you're walking around Palma. Look at this, it's almost like a Tesla experience here. It's actually really, really well done at this point. You genuinely can't really complain about that, can you? And for those who can't upgrade to 5.0 due to hardware issues, well, they have every right to be upset, in my opinion. What do we have here? For instance, with the performance version, which is why I almost make it, you know me, I'm all about maximizing. I'm the kind of person who says, if there's a GTX and a GTX performance, naturally I'll go for the performance. I want the best. But if you choose that one, you also get the DCC included, for instance, which is the advanced suspension control system, the highly adaptive one, adjustable in 13 steps. With the ID.7 over there, which is already being cleaned, that's, for instance, available only as an option with the GTX variant because it doesn't come as a performance model. So you get it with the progressive steering, standard in the GTX, but not with the DCC. This one, as the performance variant, comes with the DCC. And let me tell you, you really do notice that, damn it. So we got DCC, and to me felt no different in T7. I didn't want one without DCC because when you drive on Italian roads, it does make a difference whether it just has normal suspension or you can adjust the softness. You can do that here in individual. You just go there. I'm not even sure if it has it, for example. Let's see, because there are various models here, some with DCC, others without. Because if this isn't the performance one, it doesn't have that. Drive steering, drive dynamics. No, that means it doesn't have this now, for instance, because that's probably the non-performance version. And you can control that with a sliding lever through the 13 levels. And that's truly, you really notice with the T7, quite incredibly, how much smoother it is while driving. So that is indeed a nice thing, especially if you have a sportier car, where of course the entire suspension system is significantly beefed up compared to the standard ID.3. So the car is supposed to be tighter too, but if you still need it to be more comfortable due to the road conditions, then you can just adjust it to be softer. That's quite a nice feature, I think. What we haven't discussed yet is the topic of charging. And here's the current situation, the ID.3 GTX model can indeed charge in quite an impressively short time, under 30 minutes, from 10 to 80%, and that with a nearly 80 kilowatt battery. 175 is the peak charging rate Volkswagen states, but again, I can tell you, with the ID.7 I've seen 186, even 188 kilowatt, which you get under ideal conditions, so it depends on when you plug in the car. I always drive it down to almost empty, and if you drive it until it's at 2-3% and then plug it in, it's very likely that you'll see these peak charging rates of 188 kilowatts, and they hold very steadily. Seen from the ID.7, it can really keep up with the BMW i5, if not even match it, as seen in my road trip video has shown. And what I find absolutely awesome since the ID.7 is of course this right here. Namely, that when you select the charging station, it preconditions the battery. That is very, very important. On the other hand, you can easily and without any hassle check your current charging capability here in Optimize. And here, It says optimize if it's optimizable, so it might preheat at the press of a button, for instance. And you always see how many kW it can handle and how much time it needs to reach a certain kW charging capacity. There you see, for instance, okay, driving to the charging station now doesn't really make much sense. Here you see everything again. Here you can adjust it. It's really cool. Battery care mode, that you can set it so it only charges up to 80%, for example. That is genuinely wonderful. So the entire system worked out well. It has certainly become much clearer. You've got shortcuts here, responds nicely, has a mega clear resolution. For instance, I find this much more appealing in terms of color intensity than Chinese cars. I've just given an interview for the FAZ where I was asked how I rate German cars against Chinese cars. And that's just one of those things, aside from route planning, charging power and the like. What I really like here, take a look, everything runs super smoothly. So, the Wailing Wall from back then, you can't stick it with little notes anymore, like was rightly the case with those ID models back in the day. Because I think it's quite a complete package already. What I'm really missing here though are entertainment features. Wellness could quite easily be ditched, like forget about it entirely, but having a YouTube app would be exceptionally nice, I believe. That could have most certainly been accomplished. Yes, indeed, and otherwise it's considered to be a very solid and appealing deal. This with red highlights looks chic, really gives the GTI vibe. More of a GTI vibe in the acceleration than an R. Just in terms of power, it's like the R. Everything else the same. Sure, there's quite a bit of hard plastic around here. You can't pretend now as if that wasn't the case. But yes. In the end, just like the piano, I don't know why they can't move away from it. Just put some damn fake carbon there if you must. Yes, a beautiful steering wheel here too, like this touch nonsense. I despise it like the plague. I still can't operate it properly. No one can tell me they've never accidentally pressed the wrong thing here. Well, VW does have tactile buttons like in the T7, for example. No idea why they did it this way. So this is the interior of the ID.3 with a relatively large panoramic glass roof. Unfortunately, the headrests aren't height adjustable, but extend quite high for tall people. Yes, nice. So it looks good. It's not the ultimate in luxury, overly extravagant or anything. Here you have leather instead of velour like with the standard facelift, so faux leather. But once again, this unbelievable grime on this piano lacquer, it's so annoying. For instance, in my case, since I have carbon in the car, it's easy to maintain. You don't see the fingerprints as much, but I always keep 2 Maniac 3-in-1 cleaners in my glove compartment. I always wipe around, including screens. That's true for all displays. Yes, all right. Starting Q2, the new ID.3 GTX will hit the roads for you. I believe it's appealing. Now see it from the back too. I've barely shown it so far. By the way, we also have the highest configuration of LED tail lights included, which have been shining through since the facelift, with the black too. It just looks damn cool. Even with the GTX logo, which is quite subtle. This black and red, honestly speaking, it's my favorite color combination. I think it comes in like 4 or 5 colors. Just take a look either at EVM in the configurator, but I believe it's not yet in the configurator, so generally not. Also not available for order at VW yet. Take a look at this and see what your preferred setup is. So to summarize, one might say, it's really a great thing. The market needs this too, to possibly pull GTI buyers into electric mobility. So the hot hatch, power hot hatch faction, but let's be honest, it's obviously super annoying. For the buyers of the facelift car, which was last year when, I don't even know, when we introduced it in Hanover, January, really? Yes, so now for a good 3/4 of a year, half a year, the facelift has been rolling out, and then now the big display comes, and now the big battery is also coming for the facelift. Yes, these are just those things that, of course, don't taste so good if you've just bought a car for not a small amount of money. As I said, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it still makes it into this premium, because many would be happy about it. And for many, that €7,000 difference is exactly the deal breaker, or indeed the motivator to buy the car. If you want to save money and then somehow end up in an accident, don't forget, at fault or not, Car Expert's burner, who will get the maximum for you. And of course, let's not forget what we've already discussed with the IONT. Electricity rate, where you can save up to 10 cents per kilowatt hour when charging at home. All the details down in the description box for you. Thanks for your time here in Mallorca, which doesn't quite look like Mallorca. Sure, background, yeah, but not the weather. That's how it is. And then, till next video, bye.